misty morning, diamonds sparkle on the dew. I shiver with revelation that every thought I have is.
Hello, I'm Ken Lennick, and I'm the Creative Coach. Now, as a way of giving you some credentials, I've been a creative person all my life. As a child, I started as an artist at 7 or 8 years old. By the time I was 14, I'd already learned to play instruments, and by the time I was 12, I was writing songs, and I've been playing music all my life. I was a semi-famous doll artist with my sister in the 90s. Been at it a long time. I was even a public speaker for years and years and years. I had to teach myself to do that. Now, the point of that is that my position in life, and has always been, is to help other people to be creative. You can go find my music on Amazon.com. I'm also an author. Amazon Books. I have 3 books that I wrote when I was deathly ill and shouldn't have lasted very long, but I did. Now, it's a good possibility that all 3 books are morphine affected. I took a lot of morphine at one time because of the pain I was in, but I'm fine. I'm still here. As a matter of fact, the near-death experience of that thing took away all the fear, all of the anxiety that I had in life. And I'll talk about that right now because that's what I'm really going to talk about today. There's a phrase running around. I can't remember the person who did this on TED Talks, but she was talking about the first frickin' time. She didn't use frickin'. I won't swear like she did, but it's appropriate that she swear. It's a very old concept. I talked about it years and years ago when I was teaching people to speak, teaching people to be creative, teaching people to sculpt and make dolls. In every one of those situations, I talked about this very thing. The fear of the next thing. Now, there are people out there who swear they're not at all creative, and then there's people who out there are very creative. You know who you are. I'm going to say something kind of weird to you. It doesn't matter whether you're a not creative person or a creative person. You're still suffering from this idea, this anxiety of the next thing. Something that human beings do. It's part of life. It's part of everything that we do. Where fear runs us. When we're babies, the fear of standing up. How about the time you tried to ride the bicycle for the first time? How afraid you were. I use the example of camping. A lot of people in this modern society never go camping. But then when they do or set up an opportunity to go camping, they're scared to death. They've never been outside their home. The idea of putting a pack on your back and walking into the woods unprotected, sleeping in a cloth tent. Yikes. And yet, what do? You get enough courage up to get in the car. And you drive to the camp area, to the forest. You put the backpack on, and you begin to walk. And you're still scared. But pretty soon, you start to see the trees. You start to feel the wind on your face. You start to hear the birds. You start to hear other animals. And you begin to relax. Then you come to a cliff. Got to climb down it. Scared to death. Until you get to the bottom of the cliff. Then you feel fabulous. Look what you did. And then you set up camp. You make a fire, which you've never done in your life. You sleep in a cloth tent. You wake up in the morning, and the coffee tastes better than any coffee you've ever had at Starbucks. Every creative person has a first time. If you're a not creative person or you claim you're not creative, it's not true. Every human being is creative, and I'll get into that and why that is. little while. But the fear of doing the next thing. Now, here's what I've taught people all my life. The next thing requires movement. Depression. The best thing you can do for depression is to move, emulate. It's the same thing with being a creative person. There's a reason that there's a Michaels out there. Can't think of the other craft stores that exist. Because creativity is flower arranging, anything that's outside the normal routine that we do. And here's how it works. You decide to do, for example, string art. You want to do some knot work, macrame or something. You have no idea how to start. So you get online. Well, first, you convince yourself that you want to do it. Then you go online and you learn some knots. You go down to Michael's, you get some string, you get whatever you need. You bring it home and you start. It doesn't work, doesn't look good, doesn't work good. A lot of people just stop right there. That's the wall. But if you continue, all of a sudden you find yourself that you may have created a nice piece to hang on the wall. You just slipped through the portal. You don't even know it. And that portal is a flood of information, a flood of acceptability, receptiveness toward information that you had no other way previously to take in. There were no receptors. Then you find yourself adding beadwork, and you add color. And you begin to add other things as the information comes into you. And pretty soon, in a matter of time, you're a master at making macrame hangings. That's how mastery works. You pass through portal after portal after portal, and each of those portals transform you into a receptor of new information. And it's not just information about macrame. You'll find yourself receptive to all kinds of other information. Your opinions will change. The way you look at the world changes. Everything opens up. And I'll use the word enlightened. Lightened. There's a reason for that, too, and I'll talk about that in just a minute. So being a creative person, you still go through portals. Doesn't matter. And as a creative person, you should get off and do something other, another medium, another point of view, and start over again. Not let your ego in the way, because that happens too. Sometimes people master something, and then they get shut down again. They darken themselves because they're afraid of doing another medium and not doing it as well as the one they did before. Every creative output is worthy. Now, I'm going to get a little esoteric right now. The universe is light. Pretty much been determined. I've been reading some scientific articles that sunlight seems to repair DNA. Oh, that's interesting. I remember reading an article a long time ago about a Japanese scientist who did a weird experiment. He had a photon generator, which is basically a light bulb. I don't know how many lumens, I don't know any of that. But apparently he put a duck at the front end, and at the end of this reflective tunnel, he put fertile chicken eggs. He shone the light, the photons down the tunnel, and when the eggs hatched, they had webbed feet. He published his paper. They called him a fraud and a scandal. Then he went to, I believe it was the University of Tokyo. I may be wrong about that, but they repeated the experiment in a controlled condition with all the other scientists around. This time they took a living stalk of corn. At the other end, they put wheat seeds. fired the photons through the living corn and the wheat seeds. And when the wheat seeds were planted, they had big, huge, the kernels on the wheat had gotten to be quite large, almost as if it was a head of corn. A new plant came into existence. Photons carried the DNA from the corn into the wheat seed. Now, it's interesting, but how's that have anything to do with creative people? Well, they've done more and more experiments with photons. And they just recently published some scientific papers on a interesting experiment. They made a bell jar and made it vacuum sealed inside. There was a vacuum inside, and they made the completely dark room, and they fired photons into this chamber. They looked inside the chamber, and the photons were randomly just floating around. Then they did a weird thing. They put DNA into the chamber. All the photons came down and attached themselves to the strands of DNA. That's interesting. What does that mean? I don't know. But then they did a strange, and I don't even know how they thought to do this. They got people who knew how to emote. There are people who are trained to do that. Interesting. And when they used dark emotions, anger, hatred, vengeance, hate, all that, the DNA strands, instead of being long runs, circled themselves and turned into a ball. All the photons left the DNA strand, and effectively shutting down DNA. Now, that's a horrifying thought that the DNA is now not functioning. So in this time of COVID fear and rioting and all this hatred and discontent, all of our DNA is being shut off. We're not thriving. We're not healthy. We're not being taken care of as human beings. But the minute these people put on love and empathy and thankfulness and appreciation, those DNA strands opened up and the photons attached again. We're light. That's who we are. Now, this is where I get a little strange, because this is my interpretation of that. I believe God created the universe with light, with photons. Photons make up everything. I think the whole thing about atoms and structures is not accurate. We just made it up. Photons are everything. Photons make everything. We're made of photons. We're made of light. And when the darkness comes on us, it's the antithesis of life. So now, what does a creative do? A creative manipulates light. I believe the universe knows what has to happen, knows what the human being needs to do, knows how to make our planet and us thrive, so it gives us the information through light. Some of us are quite good receptors of light, and those receptors is what happens when you're creative. Those receptors open up. So when you're a creative person, you're manipulating photons, and you're manipulating the data from the universe in what you're making, what you're doing. And that light manipulation that you do, when others see it, that light hits them and affects them in a very positive way. I can't even tell you how many times I've heard a piece of music, or even the simplest rock song, or looked at a painting and broke into tears. What caused that? Light. Something, that light from that object, that music, was needed in my DNA. It was needed. And I accepted it. And when I accepted it, I was moved by it. I was enlivened. I was made more a human being by having experience. That's what a creative is. So every human being needs to be a creative and not a purveyor of darkness. We have to use the light in us to make humanity better. And everything we do as a creative person makes humans better. Now, I'm going to have people write me and say, oh, there's some really nasty artists out there. Their work is not light. Well, doesn't seem to you, but there's another conversation to have about that too, and I'll have that another day. Thanks for listening.